Welcome to the deep dive. Today we're going to be looking into the world of business strategy
Okay.
and how strategies actually form in organizations.
Right.
You might be surprised to learn it's not always a neat and tidy process.
Absolutely not.
Our guide for this deep dive is a classic research article called Of Strategies,
Okay.
Deliberate and Emergent
Yeah.
by Henry Mintzberg and James A. Waters.
All right.
Now, they argue that real-world strategies often fall somewhere on a continuum between two extremes. Deliberate strategies, which are carefully planned,
Right.
and then emergent strategies, which arise more organically.
Yeah, you can think of it this way.
Okay.
If deliberate strategy is like plotting a course on a map, emergent strategy is like navigating by the stars, you adjust as you go,
I like that.
based on what you learn along the way.
So let's unpack these two ends of the spectrum.
Okay.
Starting with deliberate strategies.
Right.
Are we talking about, like, building a skyscraper level of detail here?
That's a great analogy.
Yeah.
The research actually uses a mining company as an example.
Interesting.
They had to exploit a new ore body in remote Quebec.
Oh, wow.
And every single detail had to be planned meticulously because of the challenging environment and the high stakes.
Yeah.
So it really was like building a skyscraper, no room for winging it.
Wow, that's intense. Okay, so on the other end of the spectrum, we have emergent strategies.
Mm-hmm.
And it sounds like with emergent strategies, you're less focused on this predetermined plan,
Right.
and you're more focused on recognizing patterns and adapting as you go.
Exactly.
Yes,
It's about seeing what works and capitalizing on those unexpected wins.
Okay.
Imagine a company stumbles upon a successful product or market
Right.
purely by chance and then shifts their entire focus to support it.
Yeah.
That's emergent strategy in action.
That's so fascinating.
It is.
It makes you wonder how much of success is actually planned versus accidental.
Yeah. It's
Right.
really...
Like,
It's a great question. A lot of it is accidental. Now, to help us understand the nuances of this deliberate emergent continuum,
okay.
Mintzberg and Waters identify 8 types of strategies that fall along this spectrum,
Okay, 8 types.
each with their own unique characteristics.
Let's dive into those. Where do we start?
Closest to the deliberate end of the spectrum,
Okay.
we have the planned strategy.
Okay.
Think precise intentions set by leadership,
Mm-hmm.
detailed plans and formal controls,
Right.
really trying to eliminate any surprises.
Ah, so this is where that classic distinction between strategy formulation
Yeah.
and implementation really holds true.
It does.
Got it. Any examples from the research?
Yes, they talk about Air Canada,
Yeah.
particularly when they were coordinating new aircraft purchases
Mm-hmm.
and mapping out their route structures.
That makes sense given the massive investment there
Yeah,
and the need to, like, minimize uncertainty in those situations.
absolutely.
So if a planned strategy is about sticking to the script,
Right.
what's next on this spectrum?
Moving along, we have entrepreneurial strategy.
Okay.
And this one is all about the vision of a single leader,
Okay.
usually someone with significant control over the organization.
So instead of like a boardroom full of spreadsheets
Yeah.
and detailed plans, you've got, a strong, maybe even charismatic leader just setting the direction.
Exactly.
But, yeah.
The research points to examples like a food retail chain
Okay.
and a women's undergarment manufacturer,
Hmm.
both controlled by owners with powerful visions.
Okay.
So these leaders had strong intentions, but could also adapt their strategies as needed.
Right.
A bit like having a compass instead of a detailed map.
Okay. I'm starting to see how this spectrum works.
Yeah.
So it's not just about being purely deliberate
Right.
or emergent,
Okay.
but finding that balance in between
Exactly.
what comes after entrepreneurial strategy.
Next up is ideological strategy.
Okay.
Here we move away from a single leader's vision
Okay.
and instead have a set of shared beliefs deeply embedded throughout the organization.
That's fascinating.
Yeah, it's like the organization itself has a personality
Yeah.
driven by this core set of principles.
Do you have any examples?
The research mentions certain Israeli kibbutzim
Okay.
and distinctive colleges
Okay.
where specific values permeate every decision.
I see.
Because these beliefs are so deeply ingrained, ideological strategies tend to be quite deliberate.
Right.
Even if they're not always formally laid out,
Yeah.
it's less about following a leader and more about upholding a collective set of values.
It's almost like everyone in the organization is working from the same internal compass.
Exactly.
This is making me think about company culture
Yeah.
and how impactful that can be.
It's definitely a powerful force.
Yeah.
Now, this next type,
Okay.
umbrella strategy, is something I think you'll find especially relevant,
Okay.
even if you aren't running a whole company.
Great.
Here, Leaders set broad guidelines, but allow individuals to maneuver within those boundaries.
So it's about giving people direction, but also the freedom to make their own decisions.
Yeah, it
That
does.
sounds like it could be kind of tricky.
It can be. That's where leadership comes in.
Right.
The research uses an architectural firm as an example.
Interesting.
The partners had a clear vision. They wanted unique, excellent, and highly visible buildings
Okay.
that celebrated the spirit of the community. But within those guidelines, the architects had a lot of creative freedom.
So you set the destination, but you don't necessarily dictate the exact route.
Exactly.
I like that. That's a powerful way to foster both alignment and innovation within a team.
It is.
But wouldn't too much freedom in that kind of setup lead to projects going off the rails?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And one that leads us perfectly to the next type.
Okay.
It's time to talk about process strategy,
Yep.
similar to umbrella strategies.
Okay.
Process strategies acknowledge the need for flexibility and distributed decision-making.
Okay.
The key difference is instead of setting boundaries on the content of the strategy, leaders focus on shaping the process of strategy making.
So it's less about saying, this is what we need to achieve.
Right.
And it's more about setting up systems to support the how.
Exactly.
Like setting the stage for strategic thinking, but not dictating the lines in the play.
A great way to put it.
Okay.
Think about things like controlling hiring to bring in people with specific skills, or designing organizational structures that encourage collaboration. The research uses Hewlett-Packard's focus on new product development as an example. They weren't saying these are the exact products we need,
Right.
but rather this is how we will go about generating and evaluating new ideas.
So it's all about fostering creativity and innovation
Yeah,
by setting up the right environment for those things to thrive.
exactly.
So where do things go completely off the rails, so to speak?
Well, that's where we get into unconnected strategies.
Okay.
These emerge in pockets of an organization that have a lot of autonomy. Think of it like independent actors within a larger system. They might pursue their own patterns of action,
Okay.
sometimes even contradicting the organization's overall direction.
That makes me think about how innovation often happens outside of the core.
Yes.
Like those individuals or teams might not even be aware they're forming their own strategies.
Exactly.
Okay.
The research highlights a fascinating example from the National Film Board of Canada.
Okay.
A filmmaker named Norman McLaren
Okay.
basically did his own thing for years,
Wow.
creating experimental films quite independently from the rest of the organization.
So from his perspective, he might have had some intentionality.
Yeah.
But from the organization's point of view, his work was completely emergent.
Exactly.
That's wild. It's like a jazz musician improvising a solo.
Right?
You've got the framework in mind, but the specific notes are just emerging in the moment.
Perfect analogy.
And the interesting thing is sometimes these unconnected strategies lead to breakthroughs
They do.
or innovations.
But yeah, they're like little pockets of experimentation.
Right.
Where some might fail, but others lead to unexpected successes that influence the entire company.
That raises a really interesting question. How do you balance the need for control
That's a great question.
with the potential benefits of these unconnected strategies?
Yeah, it's a delicate balance.
Yeah.
Too much control, you stifle creativity.
Right.
Too little, and you risk chaos.
But this idea of balancing control and autonomy reminds me of another strategy type,
Right.
one that arises from the collective mind of the organization.
Yeah,
We call this consensus strategy.
exactly.
So with consensus strategy, we're not talking about a single leader
No.
or even a small team driving the strategy.
Right. It's not about following a leader, but a group of people independently, arriving at the same conclusion.
Okay.
Think of it like a flock of birds,
Oh, yeah.
suddenly changing direction in unison.
Yeah.
No single bird gave the order. They all just kind of knew.
That's a powerful image. Are there any real-world examples of this type of strategy?
Absolutely.
Oh.
The research, again, uses the National Film Board of Canada as an example.
Okay.
In the early 1950s, they made their first film for television.
Okay.
There was no grand plan,
Right.
but within months, 2/3 of their efforts were focused on this new medium.
Wow.
It was a spontaneous shift,
Yeah.
driven by a shared recognition that this was the way to go.
That's a remarkable example of how quickly a powerful consensus can emerge
It is.
and really take hold.
Yeah.
So consensus strategies are all about recognizing and leveraging the collective wisdom of the group.
Exactly.
It makes you realize the importance of communication and shared understanding within a team.
For sure.
But speaking of top-down,
Right.
there's one more strategy type we need to discuss, and it's a little bit different.
All right.
This last one is imposed strategy.
Okay.
This is where external forces, a competitor, government regulations,
Yeah.
a changing market, essentially dictate the organization's course of action.
Right.
Sometimes you just don't have a choice.
Nope.
It's adapt or die.
Adapt or die.
Do you have any examples?
The research uses Air Canada being forced by the government to buy and fly a particular type of aircraft.
Wow.
They didn't have a say in the matter.
So that's a pretty stark example.
It is.
But even if it's not that extreme,
Yeah.
I can see how the environment can really box you in and limit your options.
It does.
Like airlines adopting jet aircraft or, more recently, those huge wide-body planes.
Yeah.
Do they really have a choice?
Not really. The market was moving in that direction.
Right.
And to stay competitive, they had to adapt.
Right.
So even with these imposed strategies, there's still an element of strategic choice.
Okay.
It's about deciding how you respond to those constraints and make the best of a situation that you might not have chosen.
That makes a lot of sense. It's like sailing a boat against the wind.
Yeah.
You can't change the wind.
Right.
But you can adjust your sails and your course to make progress.
Exactly.
So even when it feels like you're just reacting to this external pressure, you still have agency.
You do.
In how you respond.
Absolutely. We often have more control than we realize.
Right.
Even in challenging situations.
This whole conversation is making me rethink how I approach things.
Yeah.
It's easy to feel like things are completely out of your control.
Yeah.
But it sounds like there's always room.
There is.
For strategic thinking and decision-making.
There is.
Even when external factors are dictating the game.
Absolutely. And that brings us to a really important point that the research emphasizes.
Right.
Just like almost all real-world strategies have umbrella characteristics. Almost all have environmental boundaries.
Yeah.
No organization operates in a vacuum.
That's a powerful point.
Right.
So even when you're meticulously planning,
right,
there are always going to be those external factors.
There are.
That can throw you off course.
Sure.
And on the flip side,
yeah,
even when it feels like you're being forced in a certain direction, there's still room for those strategic choices.
There is.
About how to respond.
Exactly.
Okay, so we've covered a lot of ground here.
We have.
8 different types of strategies, ranging from the hyper-organized clan approach to the completely emergent, almost accidental strategies.
Yeah.
It's pretty mind-blowing to think about how many different ways a strategy can form.
It is a lot of different ways.
So what's the most important thing for our listener to take away from all of this?
The key takeaway is that strategy formation is a dynamic process.
Right.
That involves both intentionality and adaptation.
Okay.
It's not always neat and tidy, and that's okay. The key is to be aware of these different approaches to strategy.
Okay.
To be flexible and to be willing to learn and adjust as you go.
And don't be afraid to embrace the emergent.
Exactly.
Sometimes the most unexpected turns lead to the most exciting destinations. That's a great point. It's like that old saying, plans are nothing.
Right.
Planning is everything.
Exactly.
The real value is in the process of thinking strategically.
Yeah.
Being aware of the different forces at play and being able to adapt as needed.
That's right.
And that brings us to one of the most important insights from this whole deliberate emergent framework.
Okay.
The idea of strategic learning.
Absolutely.
This feels like this is where things really get put into practice.
Yeah, this is where the rubber meets the road.
Okay.
Deliberate strategy is about control.
Okay.
Making things happen according to plan. But emergent strategy is about discovery.
Okay.
Learning what works through experimentation and adaptation.
Like the difference between following a recipe and improvising a meal based on what you have on hand.
Yeah.
Sometimes you need to stick to the script.
Right.
But other times, the best creations come from that culinary experimentation.
I like that analogy.
And the thing is, even the most carefully crafted deliberate strategy can benefit from that emergent learning.
Yes.
You put your plan into action.
Right.
And you inevitably encounter those unexpected challenges or opportunities or feedback.
Absolutely.
That's where emergent strategy comes in, allowing you to adjust course, refine your approach, and ultimately achieve a better outcome.
Exactly.
So it's not about choosing one or the other.
Right.
It's about recognizing that both deliberate and emergent strategies have their place.
Yeah.
And that the most effective approach often involves this really dynamic interplay between the two.
Yes.
Like a dance between intention and adaptation.
A beautiful way to put it.
You set a direction.
Yep.
You take some steps. You see what happens.
Right.
And then you adjust.
You got it.
Rinse and repeat.
Rinse and repeat.
That's how organizations and individuals learn and evolve over time.
Absolutely.
This is making me think differently about how I approach my own work.
Yeah.
It's easy to get caught up in the day-to-day
Yes.
and lose sight of the bigger picture.
Yeah.
This framework gives me a way to step back and think more strategically about where I'm going
Yeah.
and how I'm going to get there.
That's what's so great about this research. It's not just some abstract academic theory.
Right.
It has real-world implications for how we think about our careers,
Yeah.
our businesses, and even our lives.
What about this concept of strategic learning?
Yeah.
It seems like that's something we can all benefit from,
Absolutely.
regardless of our role or position.
It is about being open to new information, willing to experiment,
Okay.
able to learn from experiences, both successes and failures.
Right.
That's how we grow both individually and collectively.
Yeah, the research we've been discussing
Right.
doesn't explicitly talk about intuition
Okay.
in strategic decision-making,
Mm-hmm.
but it seems like it plays a role,
It does.
especially when it comes to these emergent strategies.
Yeah.
What are your thoughts on that?
That's an interesting point. Intuition is often dismissed as unscientific or unreliable,
Right.
but I think it can be a powerful tool,
Okay.
especially when it's based on experience and a deep understanding of your field.
It's like that feeling you get when you know something's right,
Yeah,
even if you can't quite explain why.
exactly.
And that kind of intuition can be especially valuable in situations where you have to make quick decisions
Yeah.
or when there's a lot of uncertainty.
Yeah.
You know, it's about trusting your gut
Hmm.
based on your knowledge and experience.
Your experience.
Of course, intuition isn't always right,
Right.
but it can be a valuable complement to more analytical approaches
Yeah,
to decision-making.
absolutely.
So we've mainly been focusing on organizations,
Right.
but I think these concepts apply to individuals as well.
I completely agree.
Right.
Whether you're running a company,
Right.
leading a team, or navigating your own career,
Right.
understanding the interplay between deliberate and emergent strategies can help you make more informed decisions.
And achieve your goals more effectively.
So if you're listening to this and you're thinking, this is all well and good, but I'm just one person, how does this apply to me?
Right.
Well, here's how.
Think about your career goals.
Okay.
Where do you want to be in 5 years, 10 years?
Mm-hmm.
What are the steps you need to take to get there?
Right.
That's your deliberate strategy.
Okay.
But don't be afraid to deviate from that plan.
Right.
If you encounter unexpected opportunities or challenges,
Okay.
be open to new experiences, be willing to learn new skills, and be ready to adjust your course as needed.
Yeah.
That's your emergent strategy.
So it's about having a plan,
Yeah,
but not being a slave to it.
that's right.
Life is full of surprises, after all.
Life is full of surprises.
And that brings us back to the role of the environment in all of this.
Yes.
The research really emphasizes how those external forces can shape and even impose strategies
They do.
on organizations and individuals alike.
Yes.
No organization or individual operates in a vacuum.
Right.
There are always external factors to contend with.
Yeah.
Competitors, regulations, economic conditions, technological advancements, and so on.
Right.
The key is to be aware of those forces
Yeah.
and factor them into your strategic thinking.
It's like navigating a ship through a channel.
Yes.
You have to be aware of the currents and the tides
Right.
and the other ships around you.
That's a great analogy.
And it highlights the fact that even the most deliberate strategies
Yes.
need to be flexible enough to adapt to those changing environmental conditions.
Absolutely.
If you're not paying attention to what's happening around you, you're likely to run aground.
Yeah, you're going to run aground.
So it's not just about having a plan.
Right.
It's about having a plan that can evolve and adapt as the environment changes.
Exactly.
And that's where emergent strategy comes in,
Yes.
by being open to new information, by experimenting,
Yep.
and by learning from your experiences.
Right.
You can develop a strategy that's both robust and adaptable.
That's right.
It's all about finding that sweet spot between intentionality and adaptability.
Yes.
Having a plan, but being willing to deviate from it when necessary.
Exactly.
Now, I'm curious, from your perspective as an expert in strategy,
Okay.
what are some of the biggest mistakes
Okay.
that leaders make when it comes to navigating this deliberate emergent spectrum?
Right.
What are the pitfalls to watch out for?
I think one of the biggest mistakes is being too rigid in their thinking.
Okay.
They get so attached to their plans that they're unwilling to deviate from them, even when it's clear that the situation has changed.
It's like driving with your eyes fixed on the rearview mirror.
Right.
You're so focused on where you've been that
Exactly.
you miss what's happening right in front of you.
That's a great way to put it.
Another common mistake is failing to empower people at all levels of the organization.
Yeah.
Trying to control everything from the top down just stifles creativity and innovation.
It does. It's like trying to micromanage a symphony orchestra.
Yeah.
You need to trust the individual musicians to play their parts,
Right?
while the conductor provides overall direction and guidance.
That's a great analogy.
And the third mistake I often see
Okay.
is failing to pay attention to the signals coming from the environment.
Okay.
They're so focused on internal operations
Right.
that they miss important trends and developments in the market.
So it's about being outward looking,
Yeah.
not just inward focused.
Exactly. You need to be constantly scanning the horizon for changes and opportunities.
Yeah.
If you're not paying attention to what's happening around you,
Yeah.
you're likely to get blindsided.
To recap, the key to effective strategy is finding that balance
Yes,
between deliberate and emergent,
it is.
between intentionality and adaptability.
That's right.
Having a plan,
Mm-hmm.
but being willing to deviate,
Yes.
empowering people at all levels of the organization,
Yeah.
and being constantly vigilant for scanning the environment for changes and opportunities.
That's a great summary.
So,
And I think the most important takeaway is this.
okay,
Strategy is not a static document.
right.
It's a living, breathing process that requires constant attention, adaptation, and learning.
And that brings us to a really important point,
Yeah,
this idea of strategic learning.
absolutely.
What does that mean?
Yeah,
How does it work?
yeah.
And why is it so crucial?
Well, strategic learning is about recognizing that you don't have all the answers.
Okay.
That you need to be constantly learning and adapting as you go.
Right.
It's about being open to new information,
Mhm.
being willing to experiment,
Yeah.
and being able to learn from your experiences, both successes and failures.
So it's not just about making a plan and sticking to it.
Right.
It's about being open to those course corrections along the way.
Exactly. And that's where the emergent side of strategy comes in.
Okay.
As you implement your deliberate plans.
Right.
You inevitably encounter unexpected challenges, opportunities, or feedback. Right. That's where emergent learning kicks in,
Okay.
allowing you to adjust your approach
Mhm.
and ultimately achieve a better outcome.
So how can leaders and managers foster a culture of strategic learning
It's a great question.
within their organizations?
Yeah,
It seems like that would require a pretty significant shift in mindset.
it does.
Yeah.
It requires a move away from the traditional command and control model, where all the decision-making power is concentrated at the top.
Right.
Instead, you need to create a more decentralized, collaborative environment
Okay.
where people at all levels feel empowered to experiment,
Right.
to learn, and to share their knowledge.
So it's about creating a culture of trust and transparency
Yes.
where people feel comfortable taking risks and making mistakes.
Yeah, that's a big part of it.
Okay.
You also need to create systems and processes that support strategic learning.
Okay. So what would that look like?
This might include things like regular after-action reviews,
Okay.
where teams come together to reflect on what went well,
Okay.
what could have been done better,
Right.
and what lessons they can apply to future projects.
So it's about building a feedback loop into the system
Exactly.
so that you're constantly learning and improving.
Yes. And that's how organizations and individuals grow and evolve over time.
Now, you might be thinking,
Mm-hmm.
this is all great, but what does it actually look like in practice?
Yeah.
How do real-world companies actually do this?
That's a great question.
Yeah.
And luckily, the research gives us some concrete examples to draw on.
Okay, great.
One of the examples they cite is Honda,
Okay.
the Japanese motorcycle and automobile manufacturer.
Yes?
Back in the 1950s, Honda entered the U.S. market
Okay.
with the goal of selling large motorcycles like the ones popular in their home market.
Makes sense. Stick to what I know.
That was the initial thinking.
Right.
But they discovered that American consumers weren't interested in their big bikes. They
Oh.
preferred smaller, lighter motorcycles.
Oh, their deliberate strategy wasn't working in that case.
But instead of giving up, Honda adapted.
Hmm.
They started selling their smaller Super Cub motorcycles,
Okay.
which proved to be a huge hit.
So that unexpected success
Yeah,
led them to become a major player in the U.S. motorcycle market.
exactly. And that's a classic example of emergent strategy in action.
Right.
They were open to learning from their experience. They adapted their approach,
Okay.
and they ended up achieving far greater success than they had initially imagined.
That's awesome.
It is.
It's a great illustration of how being open to the unexpected can lead to breakthroughs.
Yes, it is.
And it's not just about reacting to failure,
Right.
speaker. It's also about being open to unexpected opportunities.
Right.
The research talks about 3M, the company behind products like Scotch tape and Post-it notes. 3M is famous for its innovative culture.
They are.
How do they do it?
One of the key factors behind that culture is their willingness to embrace what they call accidents.
Accidents.
Okay. They encourage their employees to experiment, to try new things.
Okay.
And to be open to serendipitous discoveries.
So it's about creating a culture where failure is seen as a learning opportunity.
Yes.
And where those unexpected discoveries are celebrated.
Exactly. And that's how 3M has been able to come up with so many groundbreaking products over the years.
So what are the key takeaways for our listener when it comes to this idea of strategic learning?
Okay, first,
Okay.
recognize that you don't have all the answers.
Okay.
Be humble, be curious,
Right.
and be willing to learn from others.
Okay.
Second,
Okay.
create a culture of experimentation within your team or organization.
Okay.
Encourage people to try new things,
Right.
to share their ideas, and to learn from their mistakes.
So those accidents.
Yeah, exactly.
All right, and third.
Third, pay close attention to the signals coming from both inside and outside the organization.
Okay, so both internal and external.
Yeah, both.
What are my customers telling me?
Yeah.
What are my competitors doing?
Right.
What are the emerging trends in the industry?
Exactly.
Okay.
The more aware you are of what's happening around you, the better equipped you'll be to make those informed strategic decisions.
Whether those decisions are deliberate or emergent.
Exactly.
Got it. So it's about being constantly vigilant,
Yeah.
constantly scanning the horizon
Trusting in the horizon.
for changes and opportunities.
That's right. It's like being a ship's captain.
Okay.
You need to keep a watchful eye on the weather,
Okay.
the currents, and the other ships around you.
Got it.
And you need to be ready to adjust your course at a moment's notice.
Okay, so we've talked a lot about deliberate strategies
Right.
and emergent strategies.
Yep.
Now, I'm curious to kind of explore the spaces between those two extremes.
Yeah.
What happens when these different approaches to strategy collide or blend together?
That's where things get really interesting.
Yeah.
In the real world, it's rarely a simple case of either. Most organizations use a mix of deliberate and emergent strategies, depending on the situation, the nature of their work, and the environment they're operating in.
So it's not about choosing one or the other.
Right.
It's about finding the right balance.
It is, think of it as a spectrum.
Okay.
With pure deliberateness on one end
Okay.
and pure emergentness on the other.
Right.
Most organizations fall somewhere in between those two extremes.
Okay.
And their position on that spectrum can shift over time as they adapt to changing conditions.
So, for example, an organization might start out with a very entrepreneurial, emergent approach.
Right.
But as they grow and become more complex, they might need to adopt some of those more deliberate strategies.
Yeah.
Like formal planning processes and stricter controls.
Exactly.
So it's about finding the right fit for your organization based on your specific circumstances.
Absolutely.
And being willing to adapt your approach as those circumstances change.
That's right.
Now let's talk about some of the specific ways that deliberate or emergent strategies can interact.
Okay.
One of the most common patterns is what Mintzberg and Waters call deliberately emergent.
Yeah. What does that mean?
Deliberately emergent is about intentionally creating the conditions for emergent strategies to arise.
Okay.
It's about setting broad goals and guidelines, but then giving people the autonomy to explore different approaches and to adapt as needed.
So it's about setting a direction, but not dictating every step of the journey.
Exactly. It's like giving someone a compass and a general destination, but allowing them to choose their own path.
The research gives the example of the architectural firm we talked about earlier.
Yeah, they do.
The partners set out this clear vision for the types of buildings they wanted to design, but they gave those individual architects a lot of freedom to explore different ideas and approaches within those broad guidelines.
That's a great example.
Yeah. And it highlights the fact that deliberately emergent strategies can be very effective in complex and unpredictable environments.
Right.
By giving people the autonomy to adapt as needed, you can create a more agile and responsive organization.
So it's about finding that balance.
It is.
Between control and freedom.
Exactly. You need to provide enough direction to ensure that everyone is moving in the same general direction.
Right.
But you also need to give people enough freedom to innovate.
Yeah.
And to respond to those unexpected challenges.
Now, another interesting interplay between deliberate and emergent is what happens when those unconnected strategies start to gain traction within an organization.
Yeah, this is where things can get really exciting.
Okay.
Unconnected strategies, as we discussed earlier, are those that emerge in parts of the organization that have a lot of autonomy.
Right.
They might be completely independent of or even contradictory to the organization's overall strategy.
It's like having these little pockets of experimentation happening in the fridges.
Exactly.
And sometimes those experiments lead to those unexpected breakthroughs.
They do.
That can ultimately reshape the entire organization.
It's like a seed that's planted in the ground.
Oh, yeah.
That eventually grows into a mighty tree.
So it's important for leaders to kind of be aware of what's happening in these fringe areas of the organization.
Yes.
Because they might be the source of the next big innovation.
That's right.
You never know.
You never know. And they shouldn't be afraid to embrace those innovations.
Right.
Even if they challenge the status quo.
Yeah.
Sometimes the best ideas come from the most unexpected places.
Now, another interesting interplay between deliberate and emergent is what happens when imposed strategies are internalized by an organization.
Imposed strategies, as we discussed earlier,
Yeah.
are those that are forced upon an organization by external forces.
Right, like regulations and stuff.
Yeah, like government regulations or market pressures.
Yeah. Initially, these strategies might be met with resistance.
Of course it's natural to push back against something that's being forced upon you.
But over time, organizations can come to accept and even embrace imposed strategies.
They can.
Integrating them into their own deliberate plans and actions.
Yeah, that's right. The research gives the example of the airline industry's adoption of jet aircraft.
Okay.
Initially, this was driven by technological advancements and competitive pressures.
Right.
But over time, airlines came to see jet aircraft as a key part of their own deliberate strategies, investing heavily in new fleets and developing new routes that took advantage of the speed and range of these planes.
So what starts out as a constraint can eventually become a source of strength.
That's right. It's about being able to adapt to changing circumstances and to turn challenges into opportunities.
So we've talked a lot about the benefits
of
blending these deliberate and emergent strategies.
Right.
But are there any potential downsides?
That's a great question.
Are there any risks associated with being too flexible?
Yes, there are some potential pitfalls to watch out for.
For too adaptable?
Yeah, one of the biggest risks is what Mintzberg and Waters call strategic drift.
Okay, strategic drift, what's that?
This is what happens when an organization becomes so focused on adapting to short-term changes that they lose sight of their long-term goals.
So it's like being so busy tacking against the wind that you forget where you're trying to sail to?
Exactly.
You end up, zigzagging all over the ocean.
Yeah.
Without making any real progress towards your destination.
That's a great way to put it.
Okay. Another risk is that too much flexibility can lead to a lack of focus and consistency.
Yeah, it can.
Right.
It's like a jazz band.
Oh, yeah.
Where everyone is improvising at the same time.
Yeah.
It might be interesting for a while,
but
eventually it just becomes noise.
Right. You need some structure, some guidelines.
You do.
To keep everyone on the same page.
Right.
And to make sure you're actually moving forward.
Exactly. And the third risk I would highlight is that too much reliance on emergent strategies can lead to a reactive mindset.
Okay.
So instead of being proactive, you're just constantly responding to events.
Oh, so you're always playing catch up.
Yeah, you're always playing catch up, always putting out fires.
Right.
And that can be exhausting and demoralizing.
So how can leaders avoid these pitfalls?
That's the question.
How can they find that sweet spot between flexibility and focus?
The key is to strike a balance. You need to be adaptable. But you also need to have a clear sense of direction.
Right.
You need to empower people to make decisions. But you also need to provide some structure and guidance.
So it's about finding the right mix for your organization based on your specific circumstances and goals.
Exactly. There's no one-size-fits-all approach.
Yeah.
The key is to be aware of the potential pitfalls and to take steps to mitigate them.
Okay.
And it's about being constantly vigilant.
Right.
Constantly evaluating your strategy.
and making adjustments as needed.
This whole conversation about deliberate and emergent strategies has been so eye-opening for me.
Good.
It's made me realize that strategy is not just about making plans.
Right.
It's about being adaptable.
It is.
It's about learning.
Yeah.
And it's about finding that sweet spot between intentionality and responsiveness.
I'm glad to hear that.
Yeah.
It's a complex topic.
It is.
But it's one that's absolutely essential for anyone who wants to succeed in today's dynamic and ever-changing world.
And it's one that we've only just begun to scratch the surface of.
That's right.
But I think we've covered a lot of ground today.
We have?
And I hope our listener has come away with a deeper understanding of how strategies really work.
Me too. And I hope they'll be able to apply some of these insights to their own work and their own lives.
So as we start to wrap up our deep dive into this world of deliberate and emergent strategies, let's leave our listener with a few final thoughts to ponder. All right, here's a question to consider. How do you know what kind of strategy is right for you, for your team, or for your organization?
Right.
Is it a time for careful planning or bold experimentation? When should you stick to the script? And when should you throw it out the window and improvise?
Wow. Those are great questions to think about. It really is like trying to figure out in the kitchen, when to follow a recipe and when to just kind of go with the flow and trust your gut.
Exactly.
Sometimes you need that structure and that precision, but sometimes the most incredible things come from just being in the moment and being creative.
Absolutely.
It's all about knowing when to trust that process and when to just go with what feels right.
Yeah, and just like in the kitchen, there's no one right answer when it comes to strategy either.
Right.
It really all just depends on the situation, how complex the challenge is, how much uncertainty there is, and even the skills and experience of your team.
So you're saying it's not about picking one strategy type and just sticking with it no matter what.
Right.
It's about understanding the nuances of each of those strategies and then being able to say, okay, this one feels right for this situation.
Exactly.
That makes a lot of sense.
Yeah, and sometimes, the most effective strategies are the ones that blend deliberate and emergent elements. It's not about choosing one or the other, but finding that sweet spot that balances intention and adaptation.
It's like that dance we were talking about.
Yes.
Where you set a direction, you take a few steps, you see what happens, and then you adjust your approach based on what you're learning.
Exactly. It's this constant back and forth, this conversation between your plan and what's actually unfolding in the real world.
That's such a great way to think about it. It's not just a straight line from point A to point B.
Right.
It's more like, you're navigating a winding path. You've got your destination in mind, but you're also paying attention to the terrain and adjusting your course as you go.
I like that.
This has been such a great conversation. I feel like it's really shifted my perspective on how I think about strategy.
Good. I'm glad.
It's so much more dynamic and interesting than I initially thought.
It is.
But before we wrap up, is there anything else our listeners should keep in mind?
Yeah.
As they start to apply these ideas in their own work and their own lives?
I think one final thought to really chew on is don't be afraid of the unexpected. And in fact, embrace it.
Embrace it.
Sometimes the greatest opportunities are the ones that we never even saw coming.
Like that saying, the best laid plans of mice and men often go awry.
Yes.
But sometimes those unexpected detours, those twists and turns, they lead to the most amazing discoveries.
Exactly. So keep your eyes open. Stay flexible and be willing to embrace those emergent moments.
So it's not about trying to control every single detail. It's about being open to the possibility that something even better might emerge.
That's where the real magic happens.
That is where the magic happens. Well, on that note, we'll go ahead and wrap up this deep dive into the world of deliberate and emergent strategies.
Great conversation.
We hope you've enjoyed exploring these concepts with us. And that you've gained some valuable insights that you can apply in your own life.
Me too. Thanks for joining us.
Thanks for listening.